Hello.
Our story begins inside the world between worlds. Ahsoka looked over to her side and realized she was alive. Something felt so wrong, but it all felt like it was meant to happen. She knew her final move would likely kill her from her teacher. However, due to a small miscalculation, she was killed by Vader. Apparently she wasn't. When her head turned over to see who pulled her into this world between worlds, she saw a more adult version of Ezra Bridger. Her eyes opened wider and she couldn't believe what she was looking at. He had grown so much. There was a periodic moment between the two of them where they caught up before they started walking across the walkways. Windows or portals into places and time continued to show themselves in front of them. Voices of people unknown and known could be audible. Ben Kenobi, Grandmaster Yoda, Kylo Ren, Luminar Unduli. The list could go on. There were whispers echoing out across the world. The two of them stopped at Kanan Jarrus as he acted in his final moments of life. He used the Force to stop the fires of the fuel depot from incinerating his family, his apprentice, or adopted children if you will, and his partner. Ezra wanted so badly to bring him back, but Ahsoka told him that he couldn't do it. At least from what she understood in this brief moment, that taking Kanan out of that moment would therefore kill Ezra, Sabine, and Hera. Ahsoka felt terrible for the loss of his master, but Kanan made his choice, one that he alone could make and that one he alone had to live with. It'd be difficult to accept, but as is the journey of life. Ironically, the choice to let go for Ahsoka wouldn't be easy to neglect in the coming moments. She and Ezra would walk past another portal, and for whatever reason, Ahsoka was drawn to look over to her right. Inside of the portal, she saw someone who was so important to her. It was Anakin Skywalker. He was fighting with Obi-Wan on Mustafar. She had been unaware of this fight, but now she was horrified, outraged, filled with anger and disgust. She felt terrible for Obi-Wan as she watched the Jedi Master dismount the little platform he and Anakin were on. Moments later, Anakin was cut into pieces before Ahsoka and Ezra's eyes. He didn't understand. He knew who Anakin was and he met Ben, but he didn't make the initial connection that it was the same man who killed her. Anakin Skywalker was Darth Vader. It was heartbreaking for her to watch, and her heart broke for Obi-Wan specifically. The two of them carried along, continuing the conversation. They then stopped at another portal, and Ahsoka couldn't pull her eyes away from the window. She had been on this planet before, right before she was removed from the Order. Ahsoka looked at Kata Nemodia and tried to figure out why this was showing up, and then she saw Master Plo speeding past the portal. He was flying with a wing of fighters behind him. Ahsoka could see at the moment their cannons primed for action and opened fire on the unsuspecting Jedi Master. Ahsoka didn't know that it'd be hypocritical, but once she saw the lasers fire, she pulled Plo out of the moment. A death that, despite being significant for the rise of the Sith, wouldn't change anything if he was removed from the picture. Ahsoka's split-second reaction had her pulling the very heavy Keldor Jedi Master into the portal. They fell backwards and Ezra jumped back, not knowing how to react to what he just saw. Ahsoka got up and scanned the world between worlds as she looked to the one who brought her to the temple. He slowly got up. He was busy analyzing the area. What was this? He had heard legends of the Force, stories if you will, of individuals traveling to a world between worlds. He looked around the area and pressed his hands to his knees and then stood up slowly. He knew something was wrong, but what was it? He didn't know yet. His eyes went right first and examined the multitude of portals and windows across the landscape. He could feel a presence so familiar to him, but then he was unsure. He turned back towards the presence and saw a Degruta female, not Shak Ti. Plo looked into her eyes and called out her name, asking if it was truly her. Ahsoka smiled and she nodded her head. He noted how she had grown up, and she shrugged her shoulders, suggesting that it had to happen eventually. Eventually, what did that mean? He then looked to Ezra and offered some words of inclusion, asking who he was. Plo noticed the clone trooper armor, but he wasn't Jango Fett clone. He also had a lightsaber. However, upon second thoughts, that armor didn't belong to clone troopers. He'd never seen that type before. Plo's attention turned back to Ahsoka as he asked her what had happened. She told him that a lot of time had passed since he was last alive. For Plo, not a second had gone by. He was safe now, but he wasn't even sure what happened. It was such a quick moment. The clones opened fire and he assumed that there was a bogey coming for him. He didn't have enough time to even conceptualize that his men had turned on him, but why would they do that to begin with? Ahsoka told him that she would explain everything to him. Plo just acknowledged it before turning around. There was a ripple in the world between worlds. The voice called out Ezra and Ahsoka's names. Then said voice realized that a Jedi Master was alive. Plo turned and looked at the Sith Lord. Sidious was using the dark side to access the world between worlds, but he couldn't truly access it. He could see into it, but as is the nature of the dark side, he would never be able to get into it. His essence was too corrupting and negative. Plo told the two younger Jedi to get behind him as Sidious released a barrage of darkness into the world. Plo lifted his hands and held it back with relative ease. As Ahsoka and Ezra stood next to the Jedi Master, they only aided in his resistance of the darkness. Adult Ahsoka was much further along than she was when she was younger, and Ezra was a force to be reckoned with at his age. The three Jedi resisted the Dark Lord of the Sith as he tried to grab a hold of them and pull them. Instead, Plo knew that due to the darkness, Sidious would be punished by the Force for trying to access the world between worlds. He told Ahsoka and Ezra to hold on, continued using the Force on Sidious, and on his mark, release. Ezra, having never been around someone like Plo in a situation like this, was uneasy. He didn't want to mess it up, but Ahsoka looked at him with confidence. That was all he needed. Sidious kept trying to get further in, and Plo, last second, told him to stop as he ripped the Force towards himself. Sidious was unprepared as he fell forward, his hand being yanked through the portal and was incinerated immediately. The pure strength of the Force was enough to rip him apart. Sidious panicked as he used his other hand to close the portal behind him. He was able to, but not until he lost most of his dominant arm and burned half of his face off. Plo turned to the other two, shaking off his arms. It was an extraordinary effort, but the world between worlds amplified the light side of the Force, or just the Force itself. And so because of Sidious using the darkness, he was naturally weaker in an environment of which encouraged the use of the light. Ahsoka suggested they leave, and she asked Ezra where he entered from. So he pointed the three of them, and they made their way there. A short discussion broke out between them, but it didn't last long. Once they exited, they had to sneak away from the Imperial facility, which was under duress because of Chopper, who had become Death, the destroyer of worlds. Hera and Sabine aided Ezra, Ahsoka, and whoever else was with them into their escape craft as they ditched the dig site. There would have to be some explanations, which would be shared from both sides. First example being, how did Ahsoka come back, and who was Plo, and how did he come back? But after a relatively explainable situation was told, Plo was in for a galaxy of pain. He could feel it the moment he left the world between worlds. The galaxy was so dark, filled with so much drought, so much pain, so much evil. There was a threat larger than the Separatists. The Sith were at large. Oppression overruled hope, and the hopeless hung onto the smallest bit of substance they could. The Alliance was only beginning to form, and splinter groups like Saw Gerrera were furthering aid from the Alliance, due to their tactics. Plo had to learn that all of his friends had been killed. Yoda was still alive, and now according to Ahsoka, Obi-Wan was still alive. Ezra refused to give the information regarding the Jedi Master because he knew that there was something important for Kenobi on Tatooine. Plo had such a hard time understanding it. If Obi-Wan and Yoda were still alive, surely they would be aiding the Alliance. Surely they'd be going out and helping people in the galaxy, right? But they weren't. They were in hiding. A wave of disappointment hit him. There was no reason for Ezra, a boy who was nearly 19, to be fighting for the Alliance when the Jedi Masters who allowed the Sith to rise hid in isolation, especially being that Ezra was born on Empire Day. The talk was painful and hurtful and disappointing for him. He held his cohorts in such high regard, and for them to simply go into hiding, allowing this darkness to rise, felt like a betrayal to their code. Obviously, Ahsoka and Ezra didn't know that Yoda fought Sidious, but his internal disappointment was overbearing to say the least, being that he didn't know that Yoda tried to fight Sidious. He'd learned about the clones and how they were phased out. He also learned about Caleb Doom, and truthfully, he was proud. Caleb came from one of the greatest lineages of the Jedi Order, Mace Windu, Depa Billaba, and himself, not to mention the boy that followed him. Plo knew that Ezra would find himself to be one of the best Jedi of this new era. He had the heart of a true Jedi, though the heart of a true Jedi can be as much of a blessing as it can be a curse. The night where Plo learned everything didn't end there, but it did when he reunited with his clone commander. They weren't near each other when Order 66 rang out, but Wolf lived with the eternal guilt of knowing he couldn't save his Jedi General. The Jedi General who saved him from the malevolence of the beginning of the Clone Wars. What followed were a couple days that would only add to the pain at the heart of the Jedi Master. Despite his aid during the Battle of the Thal, Ezra Bridger would do what all Jedi must, make the sacrifice that no one can, and thanks to Sabine he was able to pull it off, when she distracted the Jedi, Hera, and the rest of the rebels upon Thrawn's return to the planet. Ezra would face off the Emperor once again, but his resilience allowed him to escape the clutches of the evil Sith Lord. His final confrontation would come against Thrawn on the Bridge of the Chimera, and as all Jedi must, Ezra made the ultimate sacrifice. While it may not have been death, it was banishment to another galaxy, a galaxy we'd have to fight for survival, hunting down rogue stormtroopers and avoiding the Grand Admiral, who would also give up pursuit of the young Jedi to maintain his resources. The disappearance of Ezra would plague the hearts of Hera, Sabine, Zeb, Ahsoka, Rex, and even Chopper. Plo would understand their grief, but his sacrifice did something that the galaxy needed. He gave hope. A victory at Lothal would inspire the galaxy to rise up. The Alliance began to grow because of it, and the Empire steered clear of the planet, the one that took Grand Admiral Thrawn, and destroyed an entire Imperial blockade. Ezra may have been young, but his intelligence frightened not only Imperials, but kept the Emperor away from his home planet. Plo would join General Syndulla as she traveled from Lothal to Yavin 4 to aid the rebellion. Ahsoka and Plo would be welcomed with open arms, due to them being Jedi, of course. To have Jedi serving with the Alliance was such an advantage. The rebels all believed the Jedi were fighting for the greater good, and nothing was more inspiring than having a Jedi serve alongside you. It would be on Yavin where Plo would meet the young Princess of Alderaan. Before their meeting, he would learn so much more about the galaxy he currently existed in. He learned of the Path, and how there were other Jedi roaming around the galaxy, though most survivors of the Purge were younglings and or Padawans. Those not killed by Vader or the Inquisitors either became them or went into hiding. Very few fought back. 3 of those who did were Cal Kestis, Ahsoka, and Kanan. Obviously Ezra was too, but he wasn't from the Old Order. He was what was typically referred to as a Boken Jedi. It was a term Ahsoka was unfamiliar with, but Plo knew of its meaning. Regardless, when Plo met the Princess of Alderaan, he could sense a connection of the Force within her, and how incredible it was. She was full of potential, but where could that have come from? It wasn't unheard of to have a talented individual come from nowhere, but not be discovered by the Emperor was a different story. Plo spoke with young Organa for a short stint, trying to understand if she knew how much potential she really had. While Leia was aware of her connection to the Force, she rarely spoke about it. Truthfully, she didn't have a name for it. She just knew what Obi-Wan told her. The Force was like a light switch. The comfort of being able to turn on the light in darkness was what the Force was. But she just only knew of how intuitive she was. Turns out that it was the gift of the Force. Plo knew of her importance to the Alliance. She'd been running missions with and for her father since she was 15, and if they could aid her growth in the Force, she could become more beneficial for the Alliance than she already was. Plo had no interest in taking her away from what she was already a part of. His biggest concern was helping her reach her full potential while aiding the rebellion. He hadn't yet found his place and refused to accept any leadership roles, because despite his ability to lead, he led armies, not rebellions. There was a big difference, and while strategy was never throwing all of his troops in the battle for victory, he wasn't about to risk Alliance forces in a galaxy he was not familiar with. He would pilot and fight and do whatever he could to help. But, as seen through General Syndulla's resilience, she was a leader. Dodonna was a leader. They were this generation's heroes. He would do what he could in the background, and perhaps one day, he would be able to come up as a leader in some sort of magnitude. Ahsoka wouldn't join Plo or Leia, but she would offer up her Shoto blade to Leia so that she could learn how to use a lightsaber. Despite the smaller blade being used as a Shoto, it was an adjustable blade, so if Leia wanted to, which she would, she could enlarge the weapon to be a regular-sized lightsaber. In the weeks after the victory at Lothal, Leia would become enamored with what Plo was teaching her. The two of them would travel from Alderaan to Yavin to Coruscant to anywhere she was needed. When Plo was in enemy territory, he usually bunkered down and meditated. He may have not been on an active hit list, considering he accidentally or apparently crashed a ship into an orphanage when he died, but being a Keldor was a dead giveaway. They typically didn't exist anywhere in the public eye, most of them staying on Doran unless one was brought to the temple, like Plo or his niece. During his meditations, he could feel everything to a greater degree. He may have faced down cities in the world between worlds, but if he were to face them again, it would be much different. Plo didn't doubt himself, especially because Sidious was human, rather than another physically strong humanoid species, but he feared the prospect of doing what the Jedi before did. He needed to pass on a legacy to the future, so that the Jedi may survive. Ahsoka was no longer a Jedi, and he wouldn't force that on her, and he believed that if Leia could be his pupil, the Jedi may live on through her. Plo at this point believed that if he were to kill Sidious, it'd be a death sentence for himself. However, that was a fate he was willing to accept, to atone for the failures of the High Council. Though there is this one little issue, which was the ever-elusive Darth Vader. Plo hadn't seen him, but Ahsoka told him his story, and how he came to be, or at least what she figured happened based on the little things she knew. To Plo, this was devastating news. He spent a lot of time in his reflection on it. He knew that he could have likely done more, but at the end of the day, blaming himself would only be taking away from the responsibility that Skywalker bore. At the end of it all, regardless of what happened, the choice to betray the Jedi was on Anakin. Plo would not seek revenge, but he would also not offer an alternative path to Vader. He had chosen this path, and while redemption wasn't unbelievable, he had tried to kill his master and his apprentice, two things that Anakin held so near and dear. To Plo, it was heart-wrenching. The fall of Skywalker was a shame. He knew the plans the Council had. Once the war was over, he would have been made a Jedi Master. Yoda even expressed eagerness to bring Ahsoka back into the Order once the war was over. They were to find and destroy the Sith, defeat Grievous, end the war, and then the pleasantries could begin. Skywalker's failure was his inability to listen to the lessons that were offered. He could take pity on him, or he could see it as an individual's chance to rise above pressure and to be what a Jedi was meant to be, failing to do that. Plo remembered through his meditations what was only for him a year before his death, when Ahsoka was lost and he guided Skywalker into having faith in Ahsoka to survive. That caring young man who had the galaxy at his fingertips and threw it all away. How foolish, how shameful. He was adored by everyone in the Republic. Senators loved him. Jedi looked up to him. His clones adored him. He was an inspiration to both young and old, and despite his flaws, he could have been the best of the Jedi. Plo's training of Leia Organa continued for the following months. She finally got comfortable with wielding a lightsaber and using the Force, but spars were difficult for her. She didn't have any easy time connecting to Ahsoka's crystal, so Plo was going to take her to Jedha so she could gather a new crystal, simply due to his proximity to Yavin. That idea was cut short when Jedha City was ripped to shreds. Plo and Leia, learning of this after hearing a recording from Yavin, one in which Jyn Erso spoke about the fact that rebellions were built on hope, prepared to move out. Plo remembered a Republic scientist named Galen Erso, so it was kind of interesting to see how generations had shifted in the last 2 decades while he wasn't around. Regardless, Bail Organa sent for Leia, and the Tantive 4 joined up with the Rebel fleet as they went to Scarif to secure the Death Star plans. Plo was teaching Leia how to use battle meditation on the way to the battlefield. He wasn't super adept at using it, he just knew how to do it, so in a way he was training both himself and Leia on how to use the ability. The entire purpose was to protect the Alliance fleet during the battle. This was also because Leia didn't want Plo out in an X-Wing in case they had any desperate needs to escape. While she wasn't concerned about Darth Vader, not knowing who he was or ever having heard of him, she was concerned with keeping her Jedi Master safe. Plo knew that there would be an attachment issue for Leia, and despite how he was accustomed to teaching, he wouldn't force attachment from her. Thokin Jedi had a much more lax rules on their own code, and he would keep that same mantra the Jedi Knight Caleb Dune kept. It was one that Plo deeply respected. Inadvertently, Plo would be grateful that he listened to the young princess. The Profundity, under the command of Admiral Raddus, received the transmission from Scarif. The rebels were going to be sent a data disk with the Death Star planes inside of them. Before they could enter the Tantive 4, they were stopped. Their door jammed or something. The wiring in the ship must have malfunctioned. Plo, sensing the rising darkness from within the vessel, immediately went to investigate. He ran through the hallways of the Tantive 4, bouncing between and past rebel troopers, and then he got to the end of the hallway and he could hear it. What he felt through the Force was much worse. The pain, the suffering, the darkness. It radiated from within the Profundity. Plo told the men to hurry. He could see the rebels trying to get the door open when a red lightsaber illuminated the hallway. Plo used the Force to rip the doors apart. The rebels turned back, afraid to see what was coming their way from behind. In the hallway with them, Vader stopped. A chill shot across the Dark Lord's body. The last Jedi Master from the High Council that he faced beat him like no other. Plo told the men to get to the Tantive 4. Vader was too shocked to understand. His master hadn't made a mention of it. Sidious had been quiet for the longer part of the last couple months, due to his missing arm and burning off half of his face. Vader told Plo that he shouldn't have come back. Plo's lightsaber ignited as he told the fallen Jedi that he will wish that he hadn't come back. Vader stormed forward as the rebels cleared past Plo. The Jedi Master told the rebels to escape, lock the hatch, and leave. But these troopers were not like clones. They were not bred for combat and told to listen to orders since they were children, and so unlike the clones would have, they didn't ditch their Jedi General. The clones would have been able to, due to their understanding of the importance of this mission. Vader launched himself forward and Plo reciprocated. Having lost to the overly powerful Savage Obrez during the war, he knew how to approach the situation with delicacy. Savage was a powerful being, and Vader would be too, especially with the cybernetics. Plo moved out of the way to avoid the first strike and then blocked the next. The strike moved him from his feet, pushing him backwards. Plo was able to regather his composure as he and Vader slammed their blades together in the middle. The Dark Lord towered over Plo, but the Jedi Master didn't fear him. Plo stood his ground and broke off their engagement, holding his ground again. Their blades slammed together once more. Vader had the confidence of a true Sith Lord, which only furthered Plo's initial belief in the fall of Anakin Skywalker. Plo called Anakin by his name and told him that it was pitiful that he fell to the dark side. He could have had so much more than this. Hearing the name Anakin sent Vader into a temperamental spiral. If he wasn't being edgy to begin with, he would be now. Vader raged forward, his blade swinging harder and faster. Plo ducked under a strike and threw his arms behind his back to block a strike from behind. Vader used the moment, just as he had with Kenobi, to blast him in the face with his fist. Plo's mask flew off of his face and Plo took a deep breath, holding the air in his lungs as panic set in. He stumbled backwards as Vader moved in. His Imperial stormtroopers coming up for support, and the rebels hadn't closed the hatch yet. This wasn't getting any better. Plo looked at the mask, and Vader lifted his boot to stomp on it and destroy it, knowing how important it was to Plo. The Jedi Master used all of his strength and flung Vader backwards, his body slamming down into the ground, knocking over stormtroopers in the way. He rose with rage. Plo used his blade to cut down the approaching stormtroopers, and by the time he grabbed his mask, Vader was up in his face again. He was thrown back, using his lighter weight to sidestep moves made by the Dark Lord. Plo needed to get his mask on. He was struggling to hold air, and his vision was becoming blurry. He pulled the mask behind his back to avoid it from being clipped by a blade. The stormtroopers were trying to get past the duel, but they couldn't. Vader saw the mask behind Plo's back and used the force, hoping to knock him off balance, but it didn't work. Plo's boots slid across the floor as he landed inside the Tantive 4. He couldn't speak, so he quickly mounted the mask over his face and told them to close the doors now. As they slammed the hatch, it locked. Vader held his hand over his head as he and a couple stormtroopers piled into the corridor. One of the rebels yelled to open fire, and they did. Plo moved out of the way as to not get hit. The few stormtroopers unlucky enough to enter were cut down quickly, their bodies dropping to the ground as Vader deflected shots until he crossed blades with the Jedi Master again. Plo tried thinking back to Master Kenobi. They talked about Anakin's anger in the past. It was obvious that it was still present, his lack of patience destroying any movement he made. Vader was furious, and he was trying to gut the Jedi Master and get the Death Star plans. Vader threw himself forward, and Plo switched from his dominant form into Form 3. Vader was so used to the powerful attacks that Plo used, and was renowned for, that the move caught him off guard. But he had planned for this. He attacked every weakened defense he could. However, Plo was only tricking Vader. He knew that based on what Ahsoka said, Anakin was defeated by Form 3, which was Obi-Wan's. If Vader was anything like himself, then he would work arduously to counter Form 3. As Vader attacked the defensive form, a random strike popped Vader in the chest piece. It was Form 1, the most basic of all Jedi lightsaber forms. Vader staggered. He would not be defeated. Instead of panicking like he did the last time against Kenobi, he gathered his composure and prepared for the next strike. He was calm and collected, which only told Plo that it was a matter of time until he could strike him down. Vader hustled as the Tantive 4 broke away from the profundity and jumped into hyperspace. They were stuck with Vader now. Leia came running down the corridor to see what was going on, as Plo focused on his opponent. Their blades met again. It was more rhythmic now. The Jedi Master, who by rumor defeated Grey Master Yoda, steadied himself. His niece defeated Vader before, and he would finish the job. Plo backed away as Vader charged forward. Plo seized the moment, their blades slamming together again, illuminating the halls in blue and red. As Vader tried to find his mark, he missed. Plo planted his non-dominant foot down and twisted his body around, breaking Vader's ankles and his concentration. His own blade was cut out of his hand as Plo drove his blue lightsaber through Vader's chest. It was silent. The sound of the blade ripping through his skin was uncanny. Plo held Vader close for a moment and wished that Skywalker would find peace in the Force. Vader tried to grab Plo's throat, but he died before he could even get close. Plo degained his weapon and released his grip of the massive suit as it slammed down onto the ground. He staggered back, and to grab a hold of him was a student. Plo looked over to Leia and she asked if he was alright. He nodded his head, catching his breath and telling her that they were one step closer to defeating the Sith. This little divergence would allow the rebels to find Ben Kenobi on Tatooine, and even through the help of a couple credits, get Luke Skywalker off of the moisture farm. All of them getting to the Yavin base before Vader's destroyer could catch up to them, due to the whole trying to figure out where Vader was thing. The reunion between Obi-Wan and Plo was bittersweet to say the least. Kenobi was now an old man, and Plo hadn't aged a day since they last saw each other. Well, it was technically a couple months. It was a sick and twisted game for Plo, but he was happy that Obi-Wan survived. When he learned of why Ben was in exile, he truthfully lost all disappointment in him. However, the question of why he hadn't trained Luke plagued his mind. Why hadn't he trained either of the Skywalker twins? Truthfully, didn't make sense. Ben and Yoda had the chosen one's children at their disposal and decided to just not train them? It was a travesty for the galaxy because it meant the task of fighting the Emperor was up to Plo and Ben, which truthfully, Plo was still unsure of. For a Sith Lord to be powerful enough to break into the world between worlds meant that in the regular plane, his powers would only be amplified. They were talking about the most powerful Sith the galaxy had ever seen, and at his control was an empire that spanned the entire galaxy, not to mention the super weapon they saw over Scarif. Sidious, on the other hand, was learning of Vader's disappearance and decided that it was time for a change. With the Alliance retreating back into whatever hole they came out of, it was time for the Galactic Senate to crumble, and so with one swift action, the Emperor ripped the government apart. He didn't stop there. He went to Scarif and had Grand Moff Tarkin killed. While he and Tarkin had been longtime allies, it was a matter of time until Tarkin would be killed anyways. Sidious knew that the Empire's social structure was built upon power. When an individual has power, they want more. When they have more, they become afraid to lose it. Tarkin had the most influence out of any officer in the Imperial military. Sidious couldn't risk a regular man to have so much control. He found Tarkin guilty of killing Director Kenrick and destroying the Imperial database on Scarif as his charges for release. Tarkin wouldn't get anything to defend himself. He'd be ousted, just as Ahsoka was all those years ago. Little ironic. This wasn't to say Palpatine cared about Krennic at all. Obviously, he didn't. It was just a good excuse to kill Tarkin. Sidious built up his entire officer structure and then pushed it to the next head of command. The death of Tarkin would send waves to the Empire, though that would take time. It showed that even the Midas could be taken down. Tarkin was no exception to that. Palpatine kept his secret weapon over Scarif, being that he was against using the weapon on core worlds. Scouts were dispatched to find the rebels and take them down, and also locate them. The Alliance had a much different plan. They pulled together all their fighters. Being that they had ample time to do so, they could mount up X-Wings, Y-Wings, A-Wings, and B-Wings. On top of that, new mother, well technically a new mother considering she basically adopted all the kids from the Ghost Crew, Hera Syndulla returned to Yavin. With a couple extra fighters available, Plo Koon and Luke Skywalker would be permitted extra vessels to fly. The Alliance knew their opportunity was upon them. Despite pieces of the Alliance bouncing off of Yavin before the Battle of Scarif, there were a number of rebels ready to take the fight to the Empire. So, that's what they prepared to do. It was a fleet of around 91 fighters, 37 X-Wings, 2 of which flown by Plo and Luke, 24 A-Wings, 21 Y-Wings, and 9 B-Wings. On top of that was the Ghost, who despite having given birth would be flown by General Syndulla, one of the most talented pilots in the galaxy, having even evaded Vader in his prime. The Alliance was rolling with one motive: destroy the Death Star. The Battle of Lothal fresh on their minds, the destruction of Jedha City and the Imperial database on Scarif was only extra motivation. It was all coming together. The Imperial oppression was so strict because tyranny is unnatural, and as Jyn Erso said, to run would be taking the galaxy one step closer to the ashes of Jedha. This was their fight, this was their chance. They may have not known that the Emperor was present, but that'd be the cherry on top. The Alliance prepared their troops and sent them into hyperspace. It was a good thing the Empire couldn't track them down, because it bought them enough time to rally reinforcements before their assault. The rebels moved into hyperspace, and upon their exit from hyperspace, they saw the weapon again. All of them knew what they were supposed to do, so they sounded off commands. Plo and Luke were at the back of the pack, with General Syndulla making sure every squad was lined up for the assault on the Death Star. The A-Wings called in first, as they kept pace with the Ghost. Behind them were the X-Wings and B-Wings, and following the support were the Clone War Y-Wings. All were ready to go. They studied the Death Star plans and they knew exactly where they were going. The battle began. The Alliance scaled aside the super weapon, and General Syndulla called out to her rebels. The Empire was coming. Flak started to override the assault, A-Wings locking into their targets and peeling off. The main priority was getting the bombers to the reactor shaft. Skywalker kept close, spinning his vessel around, still getting the hang of the throttle on the X-Wing. Plo was hanging in behind him, reminding him to trust the Force. His limited interaction with the two Jedi made it hard for him to just trust the Force, but he attempted to listen. Rebel fighters found the trench and dove down into them. Hera and the Ghost avoided them. Inside of her vessel were Zeb, Kallus, Ahsoka, Rex, and Wolf. The cannons were firing away as she pulled the Ghost around to assist the bombers as they dove into the trenches behind a few X-Wings. The battle was intense. Plo broke off from the main group, noticing an ace pilot attempting to break free from the fight. He knew if the ace could get behind the bombers, it'd mean trouble for the Alliance. When the bombs dropped onto the top side, they smacked into a number of corridors, killing walls and destroying stormtroopers. It wasn't the right target. It managed though. As the rebels fought harder, they were able to continue up a positive assault. Hera noted that there was a trench towards the left of the previous trench they used. It could be the one to get to the reactor. A couple of Y-Wings had detonated already, and the assault was beginning to look as if it was a decisive loss. Sidious was still inside the Death Star, and he knew that the rebels had information to destroy his super weapon. He needed to make an example of a mid-rim world. Hopefully they would call this Alliance, so he told the deckhands to pull the super weapon away from Scarif. Luckily, the hyperdrive was warmed up and ready to go, because before Tarkin was killed, he prepared to send the super weapon to rebel territory, especially if Vader was successful. Obviously, that meant the hyperdrive had been active for a long while, which was not intentional. The rebels tried to push towards the port so they could blow up the weapon, and as they got closer, the hyperdrive became noticeably active. Hera told the rebels to pull back, but a couple of them weren't wise enough to hear the call. Luke and Plo were two of the pilots who pulled off. The unlucky few who didn't listen paid the price, being ripped to shreds when the super weapon launched itself forward into hyperspace. Turns out, leaving a vessel of such magnitude with the hyperdrive on only creates chaos for the entire system. So, a simple calculation became a drastic miscalculation. one that forced the Alliance to jump to hyperspace because the Empire sent the Death Star into the closest star, and a chain reaction was blinding. While a dozen or so pilots were killed in the assault, a win was still a win. Palpatine was prepared for everything, except the one thing he couldn't prepare for. The poor engineer who actually noted the hyperdrive overheating was too nervous to speak, considering he watched Tarkin get accused of treachery and shot out the airlock like the imposter. The entire Scarif system would be engulfed in flames and ripped to pieces, killing off every sentient, planet, moon, and whatnot unlucky enough to be in the area. The victory itself was rather bittersweet, but the Alliance won the battle, and in the end, that's what mattered. One would assume that with the death of Tarkin and the Emperor, that everything would fall apart, but it didn't. The Imperial Moffs quickly came together and came up with a game plan. It seemed far-fetched at first, but they knew that to counter the rebels, they needed success. With Vader, Palpatine, and Tarkin dead, it was necessary to have someone willing to lead. This was in part both to timidness and knowledge from the Imperial Moffs. In the Empire, ascension to power without the proper blessing could end up being a curse that takes one's life, so the Empire got to work on their secret plan. Inside the Alliance, Plo and Ben were able to get to work on doing what should have been done for the last 19 years, train the twins. With their father dead and the Empire on its heels, it was important to make sure the next generation was ready for the fight. Ahsoka would be present for this, because she finally felt the call to be an instructor. However, she was unprepared for the responsibilities it bore. In a bad way, she thought that she'd end up like her master, or her student would end up like Vader. It was this legitimate fear that needed to be confronted, so that's what they did. They faced it head on. Plo would oversee Ahsoka's training of Luke, while also continuing his training of Leia. Obviously, there were some secrets of the siblings being shared in lineage and so forth, but that wasn't as important. Though Ahsoka would soon learn what Obi-Wan had to, which was the difficulty of training a Skywalker. She felt called to do it, and so she would dedicate herself to it. In the meantime, they would continue to assist the Alliance as it grew. The death of the Emperor would force the Empire into a true statocracy. Not that military wasn't prominent, but Palpatine kept it in check. Kinda. Now they had full control, which meant the galaxy got a lot harsher. The only way to keep their unnatural rule was to act in fear. For regular people, they saw the Empire as strength and they kept their heads down. For people who paid attention, they saw what it really was. They could see that the system was fragile with cracks all within it. If a couple rebels could take down the Emperor, then what would it take to destroy the entire system? People rallied, and all the while the Empire was making its move to another galaxy where they would find Peridia. Being that Jabba the Hutt was elusive, he was able to get himself onto the Chimera before their return to the galaxy. Thrawn at this point realized what became of his Emperor, and had to take the fight back against the rebellion. But then he realized the people were tired of the Empire by the time he returned. Rebellion wasn't small like it was when he cracked down on Lothal. There were only a couple small isolated events then, like Ferrix and Aldhani. Now, they were everywhere. Thrawn now had to combat not just a rebellion, but elite captains, admirals, and generals. He immediately upon his return decommissioned the construction of the second Death Star, and poured resources into a foundry on Corellia to produce the TIE Defender. Though thanks to some smugglers, who were put out by the Empire, the Alliance seized the factories before the Defenders could be produced or released. The worst part is, every step forward was 3 steps back for Thrawn. His brilliant tactical plays worked well in the battlefront, but now he was changing his strategy for the galactic front. He couldn't trust Imperial officers for obvious reasons, one being because it's what forced him into another galaxy to begin with. What was so unnerving was also the fact that he learned that Anakin Skywalker's apprentice and children were running rampant for the Alliance, all of them being Jedi. How nice. The Jedi were delighted when Ezra returned, but not as much as Hera, who upon seeing her boy back after 2 years, gave him the biggest hug ever. This time, it was actually shown on screen, so how about that? They continued building off of each other. Ahsoka and Luke had a very similar bond to Anakin and Ahsoka. Plo was close with both Skywalkers, as Ben and Leia had a close dynamic as well. It was difficult for them to learn about their father, especially as he was gutted on Tantive 4, but they believed it was necessary. The Sith were gone. Exegol was nothing but a barren wasteland now. The only remnant of Sidious, Dathan Palpatine, his son, had escaped after watching the Sith loyalists turn on each other after the Temple of Exegol imploded upon Sidious's death. Dathan was able to use a TIE dagger to escape from the Sith planet. It meant that there was a new future for the Jedi. Plo was given a chance to go and visit Yoda, but he refused. It wasn't personal, and he didn't mean anything by it, but he refused to give time, so much of which had been lost away so he could visit a hermit. When the war was over, he promised that he wouldn't, though that would never come, with Yoda dying before the war came to a conclusion. While part of him felt bad for not visiting his friend, he knew what was important. Kenobi taught Plo how to transcend the Force, should anything happen to him as well. The Jedi were a large aid to the rebellion, especially due to the fact that Ahsoka and Luke were going around as a duo. They were much more energetic than Ben and Leia, which wasn't an issue. Ahsoka found a new life within herself with Luke. It was still very hard, due to what happened to Anakin, but the duo made it work. The Galactic Civil War continued to intensify in the coming months. Thrawn knew upon his return that to beat the Alliance, they needed fighter superiority. But before he could release the TIE Defender X, the Alliance became outfitted with heavy hitters, mostly in part to Mon Calamari and also an Imperial shipyard that betrayed the Empire at Kuwab. It fell through, because Thrawn couldn't do enough to make up for what was done before he became leader. Of course, there was a period where he didn't even know that the Empire had a martial law on every system, including the loyal ones, which really crushed them to begin with. The Empire crumbled from the inside out, but it wasn't because the military turned on each other. It was a fundamental difference between the Empire and the Republic. The lows during the Republic got low, but never this low. There were little highs during the era of Empire, and while people could cheer it on as a little order, it was confusing stratocracy for peace. There was no system to exist under. The Alliance pressed further. New Jedi joined the cause, new rebels. Every day another lost skirmish for the Empire. Another day, another Alliance successful raid. Every challenge got harder to overcome than what came before, and at a certain point, Thrawn began to realize that the Empire he wished to serve no longer stood. What he wanted would no longer be the status quo of the galaxy, and so promptly, he changed teams. Perhaps he could ascend through the ranks and make a case for the Alliance to keep their military structure, not just as dominating as the Empire's. It was better than whatever awaited him after losing the supreme leader role of the Empire, so he took the chance. When Thrawn abandoned ship, the ship sunk. Hard. The Alliance finally arrived at Coruscant 4 years after the destruction of the Death Star, though there was no fight. Well, there was, but they elected to surrender. The war had shown many people in the Empire what it was they were fighting for. There's no backup plan. The Shadow Council was a couple of overly loyal officers, none of them having the ability to reanimate life with a necromancer project. There was no fighting, and no belief in their cause, because it died. Long Live the Empire became the song for obsessed loyalists who dwindled out of existence during the rise of the New Republic. The war was over, and the fight became a transfer of power, because as it turns out, those wealthy during the Empire continued being wealthy during the era of the New Republic. To them, the fight meant nothing, because the war was never on their doorstep. New Republic just meant that there was a democratic process. But what did that matter when you kept your money and continued the profit? The Jedi, aside from the chaos, would begin a new direction. Luke was still Ahsoka's apprentice as a Boken Jedi, while Leia continued her journey with Ben. Plo Koon, on the other hand, decided that he would restart what was lost. And while he believed that Ezra would make a fine student in this order, Ezra's responsibilities were to his family, them being Hera, Sabine, Zeb, Chopper, and of course Jacen Syndulla. Plo understood the commitment, and decided that his own journey would be one of the wanderer, or perhaps a hermit. He would go out and find the secrets of the Jedi long forgotten, and he would resurrect a fallen order. While Imperial remnants did exist, their threat was literally nothing. Not the nothing the New Republic could throw off and pay for later, but literally not a threat. Thrawn was a big aid to that, serving as an admiral for the New Republic, alongside that of legendary leader Admiral Akbar. Plo's purpose would be found in bringing back lost members and rebuilding all of what had been lost. He would choose an old temple on the planet Talam, where the Runa Jedi Temple was located, said to have been possessed by its last Grand Master. The temple was maintained in beauty over the years, and it would make a fine location to build a new Jedi Order. Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati would become the first members of this order, though Baylan would find purpose on his own journey and begin to wander, which was encouraged by Master Plo. It'd be hard, but in due time, it would fill. Plo had a lot of life in him, and being only 5 years older than he was at the end of the Clone Wars, he gave himself that extra life. He served in 2 galaxy-defining wars in the span of 8 years worth of his own life. Now he could get back into the business of being a Jedi, and the greatest ally during this period of his life would be the great Professor Huyang, one of Plo's first instructors at one point or another. Grogu would become a member of said order, and upon their training being finished, Luke and Leia Skywalker would too. Ben and Ahsoka would find home on Talam as well. While Ezra would never join the Order, he would be an advisor, as he helped his sister, Sabine, learn how to use the Force. And of course, he would teach Jacen what he did know, just as his father would have wanted, obviously being supported by Hera. The galaxy would continue to change in a positive way, but the Jedi would be the shining example of said change. Old rules being abandoned in the past, attachments no longer forbidden but understood, members of the former darkness given home, and longtime rivals given a chance for redemption. For the Jedi, that meant that Plo would personally take it upon himself, 10 years after starting his order, to watch over a little girl, one with a similar name to that of an evil emperor long gone. A legacy defined by hatred, but a future untold because, as Plo believed, Some things are stronger than blood. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William, 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Callum Rooney, Apollo, Weewu670, Anikush Dank Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, Joshua Tem, The Eternal Padawan, Malik, Johnny DeGuin, Sans the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Name of Three First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. If you want to support me other ways, go check out the Patreon. New Sith Clone Wars updates on there, as well as animation updates. Anyways, let's talk about the story. So, I like Plo Koon, you like Plo Koon, chicks like Plo Koon. Oh god. I love a Plo Koon story. You love a Plo Koon. We all love Plo Koon. We love him. He's the cool guy. So, obviously, I wanted to bring him back, and I thought it'd be cool to put him back in this era. I didn't want him to face off against Sidious, but I wanted to focus on him, like, fighting Vader, but also him, like, kind of being this resurgence, and also, like, in hindsight, like, this interesting perspective of a Jedi Master in the High Council, seeing what other Council members had done in their time, and how they haven't actually helped out the cause. Like, that would be heartbreaking for him. Like, dude would be really upset, and so I thought that'd be an interesting concept to cover in this, and really kind of see, like, his own emotions on the galaxy at large, and also give him a place in that story, like allow him to be part of the fighter squad that takes on the Death Star, or even being there at Scarif to fight Vader when he tries to, you know, be edgy. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.